This meeting is being recorded.
My name is Sharice Rock. I'm an executive member of the Barbados Union of Teachers and the current chairperson of the Professional Development and Research Committee, who is responsible for putting on this evening's production. I don't like how I look with my glasses on, but then I can't see, so I have to put them back on. At this time, I'm going to invite Sister Trudi Harris, who's going to be our moderator for this evening, to get things going.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sharice. The good book guides us to seek first the kingdom of God. And before we go any further, I'll ask Pastor Dr. Alicia Aline, who is also a BUT shop steward, to open the evening's proceedings with a word of prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we bow in your presence today. You are excellent, Jesus. You're excellent. You're excellent in all the earth. Father, Lord, we thank you for this opportunity where we as educators can come together and discuss this pertinent topic, Father God. We pray, Lord, that you will be with the facilitators of the session this evening, that all things, Lord, will go to your honor and to your glory, that persons will be informed and educated more so they're able to deal with the special education across our nation. We thank you, Lord, for persons who work in this field. Father, each and every child is special and unique in your sight. Your word declares that they're fearfully and wonderfully made. So, Father, today we just thank you for what you have done and what you will do throughout this session. In Jesus' mighty name, amen.
Thank you, Dr. Aline. I now invite Brother Rudy Lovell, President of the Barbados Union of Teachers and member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to give opening remarks.
Good evening. Chief Education Officer, Dr. Ramona Archer Bradshaw, Deputy Chief Education Officer, Mrs. Joy Adamson, other specially invited guests, executive members of the Barbados Union of Teachers, members of the Professional Development Committee, members of the media, and members of the audience, welcome. I would like to thank the participants for giving their time and knowledge to make this event a success. I have been reliably informed that we have viewers from as far as London. On behalf of the Barbados Union of Teachers, welcome to the second event in a series of honest conversations. While we have started with special education, we intend to host honest conversations on several topics, including mathematics, reading, literacy, and technical and vocational education, just to name a few. I am sure that this conversation, like the previous one, will invoke robust discussion on this topic, which is foremost on the minds of many educators. It would be remiss of me if I did not take this opportunity to inform you of another event that the BUT will be hosting on the 21st of April 2022 during our annual conference week of activities. It is entitled Caribbean Teacher Talk and will give teachers from around the region the opportunity to share their knowledge and expertise on topics relevant to education in the region while showcasing their public speaking skills in a forum like TED Talk. This will be an annual event. The Barbados Union of Teachers will not only be focusing on industrial relations, but will also seek to hold forums such as this one to discuss important issues in education. With this said, I thank the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training for showing a desire to work with the BUT, and I look forward to us walking side by side as we seek solutions to issues affecting education in Barbados. Once again, I would like to thank the participants of today's event, and I look forward to an exciting discussion.
Thank Thank you, Mr. President. And as you said, the unions and the ministry working hand in hand can only lead to the good for education in Barbados. And on that note, I invite the Chief Education Officer of the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training right here in Barbados, Dr. Ramona Archer-Bradshaw, to bring remarks and join our honest conversation on special education.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mrs. Joy Adamson, Deputy Chief Education Officer, Dr. Denny, Director of Education Reform, Mr. Rudy Lovell, President of the BUT, members of the BUT Executive, members of the Professional Development Committee, panelists, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is indeed a pleasure to offer remarks at this event hosted by the Barbados Union of Teachers. Honest conversations in special education, best practices and solutions is timely and will no doubt provide food for thought that can lead to meaningful action by all partners in education. In the study Best Practices for Including Persons with Disabilities in All Aspects of Developmental Efforts, commissioned by the United Nations in April 2011, the researchers define best practices as, and I quote, well-documented initiatives that provide evidence of success in contributing to the removal and or reduction of barriers to the inclusion of persons with disabilities in all aspects of life, and which can be considered for replication, scaling up, and further study, end of quote. So best practice is not a destination. It is a journey, a progression, a growth, a continual striving for excellence in all areas, especially education. These sentiments are aligned with Article 24 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2008, which was signed by the government of Barbados and ratified in February 2013. Subtitle Education, it speaks inter alia about the responsibilities of all state parties to a commitment of recognizing the worth of students with disabilities, their rights to a quality education to fit their particular needs, and a conscious effort on the part of government to ensure that this is a reality. The Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training is therefore committed to, 1, endorsing the learning of Braille, orientation and mobility skills, and the use of various assistive technologies for students who are blind and visually impaired, supporting the teaching and learning of sign language in schools, and promoting the unique culture of the deaf community, advocating that education of students is delivered in the most appropriate language and means of communication for the individual, inclusive of Braille, sign language, enlarged print, information technology, or other accommodations, and employing teachers, including teachers with disabilities, who qualify in sign language, Braille, assistive technologies, etc., and to train educational professionals and staff about disability awareness in a rights-based approach. As March, the month of the disabled, fast approaches, the Ministry of Education is committed to joining the National Disabilities Unit, the Barbados Council for the Disabled, and other partners in education in celebrating our young people with disabilities. Nevertheless, we recognize that there are areas for us to consider in the improvement of our catering to students with special needs. We will continue to work towards fulfilling the following objectives. Number 1, system-wide teacher training in special needs education and inclusive practices. Number 2, enhancing the offerings for the deaf and providing a wider pool of deaf educators for our present and past population of deaf students in a sustainable framework. 3, providing lifelong learning opportunities and further education for students who are deaf, blind, and intellectually impaired. We are aware that the Challenger School's adult teaching facility and the AC Graham Development Center workshop are not enough. We need to actualize other community sites for these young adults to learn a skill and so assume their rightful place in society. 4, evaluating physical plants in special schools and units in an effort to introduce and sustain programs such as music, agricultural science, independent living skills, job skills, counseling for social and emotional well-being, inclusive of snoozing rooms, so that students who need a timeout can have some spaces and calm down. Number 5, inclusion and or mainstreaming is envisaged when teachers are given the training, resources, and other resources like human resources needed to make meaningful experiences for students with disabilities. And 6, documenting statistical data which would inform the best practices with a view to honest evaluation and adjustments where necessary. I pray that through these honest conversations, you will fully explore the implementation of these objectives as we continue to journey, as we continue to grow, as we continue to strive for excellence, which we know is possible for students with disabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Archer Bradshaw. And I was taking copious notes, not in my role as a moderator, but as a primary school special education teacher, because we look forward to the implementation of all of those things you mentioned. Thank you. Now, at the first panel discussion in this series, Honest Conversations about Special Education on June 14th, 2021, we heard from panelists from the British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos Islands, Jamaica, and Barbados on the process of identifying students with special needs, the provision of services available to them, and access to said services. Today, we intend to focus on the best practices in place across the region, and of course, solutions to the problems we may discuss in this honest conversation. We have a cohort of highly educated and experienced regional practitioners who you will hear from this evening. I now invite Brother Anderson Butcher, member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to introduce the first presenter.
Trudi, excuse me
Hi.
a minute.
Hi, Sharice.
Dr. Archer gave a lovely presentation, but I was trying to alert her that her video was off. So I don't know if she wants to turn on her video now and let the others, especially our Caribbean sisters and brothers, see her.
Are you seeing me now?
Yes, we are.
Oh. Hello, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Brother Anderson Butcher.
Thank you, Sister Trudi. Dr. Charmaine E. Gooden Monteith has more than 30 years experience in education and has served at different levels of the education system. She pursued a doctorate in education with a major in special education at the Nova Southeastern University, Florida, and also studied at the University of the West Indies and Chartwood Teachers College in Jamaica. Her experience includes instructional design, planning, organizing, preparing materials, and facilitating conferences and workshops for teachers and other school leaders. Her advocacy and public awareness campaigns for teachers, parents, and other stakeholders have educated, inspired, and motivated others to embrace persons with special needs. She has a clear understanding of the revolutionary strategies and policy decisions required to ensure that every child has the opportunity to develop his or her full potential. Her passion for teacher professional development and special education underscores her commitment to a better quality education for all. Her research on the inclusion of students with special needs in the regular classroom and the important role that teachers have to play in successful implementation is of paramount importance to ensure that policymakers and educators find creative ways to ensure that no child is left behind. In addition, she has friends and relatives who have special needs who have not received the full support of the education system and were, therefore, unable to realize their full potential. Dr. Gooden Monteith is the author of 2 other books and is a member of the Florida's Writers Group. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Dr. Charmaine Gooden Monteith.
Indeed, an honor and a pleasure for me to join you. I thought I would be, well, I don't know much about cricket, thought I would be about the second batsman. I didn't know that I was going to be the first because I was hoping to hear somebody else go before me. But I'd just like to thank you for that lovely introduction. Moderator for this honest conversation about special education series, Vice President Rudy, and all the organizers, my fellow panelists and viewers on the platform, good afternoon. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to be participating in this honest conversation series. I had the distinct pleasure of being a member of your audience on the first one that you had when I was invited by my colleague and friend, Dr. Sharon Anderson Morgan, who was one of the presenters last year. I found the conversations very interesting and timely. And so today I feel very elated to be invited to this year to be a panelist. I'm joined by another colleague from Jamaica, Dr. Pauline Watson Campbell, someone who has years and years and years of experience in this field, and you'll hear from her later on. I turned my attention to special education, as you had heard before, because of the fact that persons who I knew, whether family or friends, that they had challenges. And I decided that when I was doing the doctoral program, I was going to look at special education. Throughout the region, we really need to be having honest conversations about special education. And in your first series, you heard about what is going well in Jamaica and some of the challenges as well. My presentation, however, will focus on my dissertation that I had done. And the title of my dissertation, well, I have my book, which is from my dissertation, is The Inclusion of Students with Special Needs in the Regular Classroom, Teachers' Knowledge, Attitude, and Practice in Jamaica and globally. And since then, this book has been published by Dr. Floyd Morrison, who has put out Dr. Floyd Morris, a group of, it's a monograph with persons, some of us who had presented at the Disabilities conference that was put on by Ieps. These are very important resources because when I did my doctoral program, there was very little literature in the Caribbean about the Caribbean. So you persons who have gathered, if you are studying and you intend to do special education or for the Ministry of Education, there is more material available now. And our research, my research was in between 2014 and 2017, and there are others that have come out in recent times. Now, globally, there has been a paradigm shift to having students accommodated in the regular classroom. This is not a new phenomenon, but there is now a strongly held view that it is a human rights issue. However, some teachers are concerned that they are not trained to teach these children. In countries like Jamaica, and where the class sizes are very large, sometimes teachers might feel reluctant, although the attitude is changing as persons get more information. The literature highlights some major challenges in implementing inclusive education. For example, Warnock in 2010 pointed out that inclusion is not a matter of where you are geographically, but where you feel you belong. It's a sense of belonging and getting support. Regarding challenges such as those discussed by Warnock, the Matthews and Mawini 2013 argued that there is not a definition of inclusion that is accepted by all stakeholders. I think another person spoke of inclusion as a social issue, and that it buttresses social paradigms, and it is important for persons to feel a sense of belonging. In the Caribbean, however, throughout the years, many students with special needs are in the regular classroom, sitting with several of them being in a regular classroom setting, with several of them being unidentified. Usually, these students are only identified or they come on the radar when there is inappropriate behavior, or if they're underperforming or perhaps overperforming. There is no mandatory diagnostic requirement, and what is seriously lacking is when the psychoeducational assessment is done, oftentimes the teachers and principals in some of our countries do not necessarily have a clue what to do with this report that the child parent takes to school, or sometimes these are placed in file 13. Some people also believe that children who are having these challenges need to change their mindset. Some persons believe that it's a cultural thing where somebody did something, perhaps obia or so on, why these children are having these problems. And it is not unique to us in the Caribbean, because one of the countries that I had looked at when I was doing my research, also, I don't quite remember the name now, but it might come back to me. They had or of this a similar opinion that something had gone wrong with these children, perhaps based on what their parents had done before. We had also had the task force report of 2004 that had made some recommendations about how we could fix the system. Some of the things have been fixed, but some of them we still have a long way to go. Many of us in the region have also subscribed, and Jamaica, I know as of a fact, is a signatory to the Salamanca statement that was highlighted in 1994 about every child having a fundamental right to education and must be given the opportunity to achieve and maintain an acceptable level of learning. Every child also has unique characteristics, interests, abilities, and learning needs. The concept of, so my research, well, the concept of inclusion is to ensure that we have children who are supported in the regular classroom. They are in the least restricted environment, and they are being supported by their peers and the other support services that can help them. Things such as assistive technology and having someone to give them additional attention. And usually they are supported by having an IEP. The title of my research was The Impact of a 3-Day Professional Development Program on Jamaican Teachers' Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practice. There was very little literature, as I had said before. Now, the problem addressed in this study was that at a public primary school in Jamaica, the majority of general education teachers lack the skills and training to effectively offer differentiated instruction to children with special needs in an inclusive classroom setting. The evidence to support the existence of the problem was based on anecdotal reports from teachers and administrators, as well as research conducted in all Jamaican schools by Floyd Morris, and also a study done by Hunter Johnson, Newton and Cambridge in 2014. As you know, teachers are central to the process, and teachers' self-efficacy, as spoken about by Bandura, is very, very important, because if a teacher does not feel confident about carrying out an activity, it will affect the teacher's confidence and perhaps even ability to deliver. So the 4 questions that I tried to answer in my research: what is the impact of the Inclusion Professional Development Workshop on teachers' knowledge of best inclusive practices and their perceptions of their ability to adapt instruction? What is the impact of the Inclusion Professional Development Workshop on teachers' knowledge, attitudes, and practice regarding best inclusive practices and the inclusion of students with specific disabilities? What is the impact of the Inclusion Professional Development Workshop on teachers' perceptions of the ability of resources and the collaboration of special and general education teachers? I also wanted to find out, is there a statistically significant difference in teachers' attitudes regarding inclusion after the professional development workshop based on gender or grade level? Now, some of the components of the including setting must include teachers, school leaders, strong support from school leaders and other stakeholders, whether or not there is technology and the necessary resources that are needed, consistent financial support, effective supervision of the education system, and buy-in from citizens. Strategies to ensure that inclusion works: differentiated instruction and assessment, universal design for learning, co-teaching, and parents in the Caribbean should become more strident advocates to get the support needed for their children and to demand, along with other stakeholders, that their children, where possible, especially those with mild to moderate disabilities, in the inclusive setting, should receive an education in a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment with all the support services as they have it under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act in the USA. Teachers are very important to the process of successful implementation. Unfortunately, colleagues, there is very little literature, as was said before, in the Caribbean about special needs and inclusion, and I had a real difficult time conducting my research. I'd like to also share with you in my initial remarks that the results of this study show that a professional development program workshop can positively influence teachers' knowledge, attitudes, and practice regarding inclusion. It is a positive beginning that shows promise of the development of an inclusive community at the target school if professional learning and addressing teachers' concerns can become universally accepted priorities. It is a worthwhile endeavor. The compelling reason for achieving it was offered by Roos and Florian, 2012, who stated that the development of successful inclusive schools, schools for all, in which the learning and participation of all pupils is valued, is an essential task because of the benefits that such schooling can bring to individuals, communities, and society. Perhaps one of the biggest challenges facing teachers is that they are conflicted as to how to straddle this paradox. On one hand, teachers are expected to improve students' outcomes, and they are expected to meet the needs of the diverse learners. This can cause anxiety sometimes because teachers are now being held accountable, and some persons are worried that having students with special needs might be a distraction, although this is not necessarily so if they have the necessary support services. And in the words of a teacher who was interviewed at the school that I had done my research, an inclusive classroom might be beneficial to some students. She said, I am, however, of the firm belief that teachers should be adequately trained for this kind of classroom and should also be adequately trained for this, should be given to support to meet different needs. There's another teacher who said, it can never work and it will never work, period. But I'm hopeful, colleagues, this afternoon, that there were other teachers, though, who said, this teacher reflected the views of several other teachers. After doing the workshop on the inclusive classroom setting and teaching, I am better able to deal with students who have some disabilities. I know some of the behavioral patterns of these students, and I will now become more observant of my students and learn how to cater to their needs. And that gives me hope, colleagues. And I'd like to end there for now. So those are my few opening remarks, and maybe more than few. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charmaine Gooden Monteith. Congratulations on your research and for publishing. As you rightly said, there's little literature available on special education in the Caribbean. So I invite you to let us know how we can get copies of your book. If it's available on Amazon, feel free to share the link in the chat.
Okay, and if not, we can use some of the other means of sending the books overseas.
That is correct. The union will probably make contact, even if we use that as a method to make the book available to teachers here. Thank you very much for your presentation. I now invite Sister Andrea Korene, third Vice President of the Barbados Union of Teachers, to introduce our second speaker.
Good evening, all. Donna Holder is an educator with 34 years experience. 13 of those years, she served as senior teacher in charge of the special education units, including Ellerton, Eagle Hall, All Saints, Charles F. Broome, and Christchurch Girls. The past 4 years, she has been assigned as principal of the Erdeston Special School. More than her role as an educator, she has been involved with several organizations which represent or lobby on the behalf of persons with disabilities. For example, the National Disabilities Unit, where she was band leader for the Kiddies Band for 5 years, director of the National Summer Camp Program for Children with Special Needs for 10 years. She's a founding member of the organization, the Social and Recreational Body for the Disabled. She has vowed to be a voice for persons with disabilities in Barbados. Currently, she is a member of the selection panel for the Christchurch Independence Parish Committee. In addition to this, she serves as wife and mother to Wendell and Donna Holder, respectively. Her philosophy in life is, why try to fit in when you were born to stand out? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Donna Holder.
Pleasant good evening to everyone. It is indeed my honor and my pleasure to represent Barbados on this panel this evening. Let me start by giving you a brief overview of the special education facilities in Barbados. We have 3 special education schools, namely the one at which I'm currently principal, Erdison Special School, which caters to students with a variety of disabilities, inclusive but not limited to ADHD, autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, ODD, and learning disabilities. These students range from age 5 to 12 years old. Next, there's the Anthill School, which caters to students who graduate the primary system, and they go from age 11 plus to 18 plus. Just note that because these students are growing and they're getting older, the disability does not necessarily disappear. The Irving Wilson School, which caters to students primarily with visual and hearing impairments, and has now expanded to include students with autism, age 3 to 18 years. We also have some special education units. These are attached to primary schools. There's a senior teacher in charge who has responsibility for the administration. These units usually consist of around 4 classes. There are 4 units attached to primary schools: the All Saints School, Charles F. Broom Primary School, the Eagle Hall Primary, and Ellerton Primary. Next, we have some resource rooms or pull-out programs. These consist of students who are placed in the regular ed classroom, but go to the resource room for remediation in language, math, reading. Such settings can be found at Hilda Scheme, St. Christopher, St. Stephen's, St. Matthew's, Grantley Prescott, Gordon Walters. Private special education schools. There are 4 government-assisted schools. These are the Challoner School, Learning Center, Sunshine Early Stimulation Center, Derek Smith School, and Schoolhouse for Special Needs. The Albert Cecil Graham's Multidisciplinary Clinic also cares to students with special needs. They have a special class, but here it must be noted that this institution falls under the Ministry of Health and not the Ministry of Education. Special ed in Barbados. There is no special education curriculum in Barbados. It must be noted that several committees have been formed over the years to work on the formulation of a special education committee. However, there has been no success up to this point. Special educators are required to follow the national curriculum by employing processes of accommodation and modification. What are these? Accommodation. Teachers can accommodate how information is presented to the students, how students are allowed to respond to assignments and assessments, the settings in which they learn or are tested, or the amount of time given to complete a task. Accommodations allow students to follow the same curriculum and meet the same expectations as their peers. Modifications. Teachers can modify or change what information is taught to a student. Both assignments and curriculums requirements can be modified to fit the student's needs. For example, task analysis can be used. This allows students to learn similar skills and concepts as their peers, but the materials to do so are modified to meet the student's ability level. The goal of accommodation and modification is not only to make schoolwork easier or break it down simpler, but to level the playing field for special education students so that they can receive a comparative education as their peers. I will now take a look at 5 best practices which I think are pertinent to special education in Barbados. First, use of assessments and that are flexible and diagnostic. Students with special needs may find it difficult to demonstrate mastery on grade level tests. So why restrict them to such tests? Use more flexible and adaptive diagnostic tools, which will allow you to get a full picture of your students' capabilities. They may also require additional academic support. However, data collection on the little wins adds up to great growth, and it allows students an opportunity to track their improvement. Example, the use of portfolios. If a student is allowed to have a portfolio for a year, the pieces that entered are dated and they can track their progress. They can see the improvements in writing, improvement in their art, etc. Currently, there are still some students that are subjected to grade level tests, those in the regular primary schools who may fall into a pilot program, etc. These do the end of term test. However, many of these are not presented in the format that allows or lends to the understanding of these students. Some of them require more pictures, more graphics. They may require some sort of assistance, whether it be a reader. For instance, those students who were allowed to take the BSSE, Barbados Secondary School Entrance Exam, were given additional time, 15 minutes, only 15 minutes. You can determine how far or what they're capable of doing in that time. They're also allowed to make a request upon submission of documentation to validate that request for maybe a reader. More authentic forms of assessment can be used. Video presentations for practical exercises, the recording of reading extracts, dramatizations, artistic presentation, which will allow or give us as teachers a true picture of the students' skills, strengths, and the degree of understanding that they have acquired. Next, I want to look at the development of the IEPs. The IEP is an individual education plan. The compilation of the IEP has drastically improved instructional goal setting for students. One of the aims of the IEP is to level the playing field for students receiving special education services. The ideal individual education plan team should consist of the child parents or parents, special education teacher, if in a regular education setting, the regular classroom teacher, representative of the school system, be it the principal or senior teacher, related services professionals, example, psychologist, social worker, occupational therapist, or any other desired professional depending on the student's needs. Our individual education plan, which should really be called an individual learning plan, it does identify student strengths and weaknesses and identifies the academic and non-academic goals for the student. However, the team comprises a limited number of persons. It's usually restricted to parents, special education teacher, principal, senior teacher. There's a provision though on the form to recommend any additional service which is deemed necessary for the student's development, example, a speech therapist. However, for the most part, these services are sourced through the Student Services Division of the Ministry of Education. There's usually an extremely long waiting list, and students may even age out of the school program before even receiving such services. In addition, many of our parents are from low socioeconomic backgrounds and are unable to afford the undertakings of such resources themselves. There is a need for more stakeholders to assist in the provision of these services. Government alone cannot do it. Next, differentiated teaching, instructional content that engages students through multiple learning modalities. Classroom instruction should appeal to auditory, visual, tactile, and kinesthetic learners. When students are exposed to a variety of instruction and learning styles with pedagogically sound approaches, instruction becomes more meaningful. The use of technology, physical manipulatives, video presentations, which may appeal to visual and audio learners, worksheets for tactile learners. Such multimodal tech-based instruction allows for a unique learning experience for our students. And this provides them with an opportunity that can be transferred to different learning environments. Example, a simulation. Imagine how our students can be transformed into worlds that they only read about in books. The teaching and learning experience executed in our classroom is done primarily through differentiated teaching. Concrete methods are employed and students are exposed to many approaches to teaching a particular concept. For example, subtraction, we may use the number line, grouping, the use of concrete materials. The students will gravitate to the one more suited to their learning style and cognitive ability, so that more than one methodology to the teaching of subtraction may be practiced in the classroom. Then we use things, for example, teaching a lesson in science, living things. Like say plants need water, air, and sunlight to survive. The student who is capable may write 2 lines about that. Another set of students may be required to place objects in a category on their worksheets under the heading what plants need, so therefore they should identify the sunlight, water, etc. And then there may be a third category of students who you will present with an art sheet, and it contains the plant growing, the sun in the sky, somebody watering the plant, the wind blowing, and they may just be required to color that worksheet. These are examples of how we can differentiate in our teaching. Next, professional development. The field of special education is always evolving. As a professional, you should have access to tools, research, and the learning you need to make your students successful in their academic development. Special education teachers typically do the following: assess student skills and determine their educational needs, adapt general lessons to meet students' needs, develop Ieps for each student, and plan activities that are specific to each student's abilities. In order to do so effectively, professional development is necessary. The Ursuline Teachers College, in their primary teachers training, does take the teachers through a component of special ed. In addition, within the last 2 years, there has been an introduction of a special needs course, which I'm sure is in its 2nd cohort. Inclusive in this program is not only teachers in special ed, but teachers in regular education. I think this presents an opportunity to have special education teachers throughout the primary and secondary school. And in doing so, these teachers can work with just meet the students' needs as they are in front of them. And I think it allows for us in special education to work with those students who have specific needs and disabilities. However, I find that in some cases, some teachers are reluctant or hesitant to engage these students, even though they have the training. I think sometimes they think, okay, I'm not competent enough, but we are hoping that such programs will provide them with the tools they need. Periodically, the Ministry of Education through Student Services affords a number of teachers opportunities to participate in online training courses. Example, we took part in the autism spectrum disorder course through the University of New Brunswick. This was done to great success. However, most of us were looking forward to taking part in part 2 of that training, but due to lack of funding, this was not possible. It is my opinion that there's a need for more consistent training in a wide variety of areas, which will allow special educators the opportunity to maximize their potential and be able to deal with students with all disabilities. There's also a need for a wider component in teacher training so as to create a greater move towards inclusive education. Train the trainers. When we do so, we are providing a pool of pedagogical expertise for future training in specialized areas in special education. Funding for special education programs as a best practice. Formerly, students with special needs were not afforded many educational opportunities. However, over the years, legislation has changed this. Although we have a long way to go before our education system ensures every student reaches his full potential. Fulfilling the educational, social, emotional, and physical needs of students with exceptionalities has proven to be extremely costly and requires a huge injection of funding to make the process efficient and effective. Funding to schools and units are primarily government-based. and takes the form of a grant given to the various educational institutions. This funding is inadequate and dictates specifically what can be done with the money allotted. So there is no real leadway to do as you think is best suited to the areas you think are best suited to spend with. Schools often have to source additional funding from private businesses and institutions by forming meaningful associations with these entities, where we can request funding for specific areas, whether it be professional development, setting up of centers, such as stimulation rooms, as well as the purchasing of augmentative communication devices for our students with autism. Units which are attached to primary schools are dependent on a portion of the grant money given to that school. And this is done at the discretion of the principal. No set amount is stipulated. On occasions, organizations, example, PowerHome may provide funding to conduct specific programs, such as done before in sign language, etc. But overall, special education is a field that demands a large investment of resources in an effort to provide equity for our students with special needs in comparison to their general education peers. Having high expectations for our students is wonderful, but we may need to provide opportunities for them to shine. In doing so, we need to create classroom environments that are free of distractions where possible, so that it allows our students to maximize their learning. Provide structured classrooms, even though at times you may have unstructured activities, but this is so needed for our students with autism. Model appropriate classroom behaviors, as many students with special needs will not necessarily know just how to do things. Use timers, bells, music to help them transition during the day and to create a semblance of order. Provide directions to assignments, activities, and assessments in a variety of ways. Make these instructions verbal, they can be written, they can be pictorial, or even through dramatic presentations. Check often for understanding throughout the lesson and provide redirection when needed. Do not take it for granted that understanding has been had by the students. Differentiate your teaching to ensure that all types of learners may excel in a variety of ways. As an educator, you know how different each child can be. Get to know your students with special needs. Understand their abilities and their limits. At the end of the day, the aim of education is to provide well-rounded students who can make a meaningful contribution to society. And this too should be our aim for our students with special needs education. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Holder, for the practical way you shared what exists and what can be improved in the field of education, special education in Barbados. There's a lot you said that can be put in place in a classroom tomorrow. I want to move on quickly to the next speaker, and I'm going to ask Brother Ian Marshall, a member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to introduce her.
Good evening, everyone. Korene Crawford-Trotman, Bachelor of Education, Special Educator, and Autism Coach. Korene Crawford-Trotman is a Tobagonian by birth. She obtained both her primary and secondary education on the island of Tobago. She left Tobago in 2006 to pursue her Bachelor of Education in Special Education in a pilot partnership between the University of the West Indies, Mona Campus, Jamaica, and Michael Teachers College, Jamaica. Graduating with honors, she returned to the island of Tobago, passionate and equipped in educational assessment to serve her homeland. She joined the staff of the Tobago School for the Deaf, Speech, and Language Impaired in 2010. Though she has taught a plethora of students with special needs, there's her passion for students with autism or those displaying autistic-like characteristics that led to her joining the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago, located in Dabadee, Trinidad. She became a full-time autism coach in 2018 after 3 years of training at the Autistic Society of Trinidad and Tobago, which is a center geared towards providing education, support, and training to caregivers, parents and guardians, teachers, and community groups who interact with persons with autism. Ms. Trotman continues to be an advocate for persons with disabilities through the hosting of sensitization workshops, television interviews, and parent counseling. She consults weekly with parents of newly diagnosed children with autism. She works with parents, guardians, and caregivers to sensitize, plan, and build IEPs or individualized education programs to effectively communicate with, support, and educate this often underserved group of persons with disabilities. Please welcome Korene Crawford-Trotman.
Thank you so much for that introduction. All right. No, unfortunately, I'm not going to read. I'm really going to speak from my heart because I have some things that I really want to speak about, right? And the first thing I want to say is that Tobago is not Trinidad. And I want that to be very clear. Tobago is not Trinidad, and Trinidad is not Tobago. So I was so glad when they introduced me as being Tobagonian, because the things, our experiences in Tobago are totally different than if you have a speaker from Trinidad, because there are still so many services, there are still so many things that our parents and our teachers have to do in Trinidad in order to accommodate our children, our special needs community. All right? And I'm not going to run through what I've heard, the themes that I've heard before, because I realize even in the workshop that you all had before, that you all have spoken about how we need legislation across the Caribbean, and we really do. We really do. And though we need legislation, we need laws, we need policies, and then we need enforcement of legislation moving forward. Because if we have legislation and it's not being enforced, then we find ourselves at this place where so many of our educators are frustrated, you know? And as in the introduction, I started my time working with the special needs community at Tobago School for the Deaf, Speech and Language Impaired. And we are the only, I could boast about that, we are the only special school in Tobago that accommodates all disabilities. Though there are others, they do not accommodate all disabilities. So we accommodate every single child with any kind of disability you could count on, right? So at the Tobago School for the Deaf, we have the deaf, hard of hearing, we have learning disability, we have the blind, we have the autistic, we have traumatic brain injury, we have cerebral palsy, and the list goes on, because today I saw 2 new students. Yeah, and these students are old. These are 9 and 10 and never been to school. You know, and my principal, she was like, we need to get them into a classroom. We need to get them into a classroom space, you know, because our children cannot be approaching double digits and not in a classroom. And our school presently accommodates 34. We have 34 students and our waiting list is 35. So that could tell you where we are. That could tell you where we are. And though we have signed on to treaties and conventions and the Salamanca statement, we've signed on to many things. But what is happening on the ground is what is grieving us as teachers. We are greatly grieved as to what is going on in our classrooms, what our parents are facing. And in as much as we as teachers, we are passionate, we are ready to go, we want to fight the fight, there's only so much we can do. There is only so much we can do. And what we have to do is propel, we have to encourage parents to stand up and fight this fight and force our parliamentarians, force our politicians to stop politicizing special education. Because every year, in every budget, they politicize and do as if they will do, and they don't. They have been promising to build a special school for our school for like, I've been teaching there for 12 years. This is my 12th year, and I've heard 12 years of building a building. We are presently in the back of a primary school, in a post-primary building. So it was never built to accommodate special needs. So meaning there are no ramps, there's nothing to accommodate the blind, there's absolutely nothing to accommodate the deaf. And I was thinking just the other day, I was thinking to the time where we had an emergency, it was an earthquake. And you know, in earthquakes, yes, we do our fire drills, but in earthquakes, the level of panic that happens, the entire school ran out because there is a bell, and the bell went off 3 times, and we know that is the signal to run. And the entire deaf classroom sat still. They did not move because they did not know. Obviously, they didn't hear the bell, but the entire school heard the bell. And this is what happens in emergency situations. Our deaf are usually, they usually are found at the back of the line, because almost everything in society, it warrants you having some sort of hearing. Even in this time where we have to wear these masks, our children who have to sign and who have to lip read are at great disadvantage. And you cannot just tell them, well, wear a face shield, right? Because this is COVID situation, because we know it's airborne, right? A face shield is not enough protection. And I don't know, I don't feel protected being in a classroom with a child that just has on a face shield, you know. But how do we teach our deaf who need, and then even the masks that are clear, the government is not willing to go through that level of expense. You know, everything for special is expensive. As one of the presenters said before, everything is expensive. But how will we, the thing is, we are one moment away from being special, you know, from being disabled, one moment away, the one car crash away, one surgery away from having some sort of disability. And people kind of forget that. Unless you have somebody who is disabled, we forget that disability could be right around the corner for you, right? So we really need our parents to lobby and work with us as parents, you know, because in as much as we train and we educate ourselves, the people that are working with us, even our teachers' aides, they are not trained, you know. They just say, all right, if you have your O levels and A levels, you could come and be a teacher's aide. But we know it takes a lot to teach a special needs child. We do know that. And we don't have people in the system who understand that we need paraprofessionals. We need paraprofessionals. We need people who understand special needs, special education to work with us. Just because we are trained, it doesn't mean that we could handle a classroom by ourselves, plus train our teachers aid. So those are the things that we want people to look at. We don't just want somebody to help us in the classroom. This is not daycare. We need professionals working alongside us. And I have a few examples. I hope you don't mind. One of our students, he recently passed one of the high schools in the island. I wouldn't say recent, like 4 years ago. He's in fourth form now. He recently passed for high school. And when he went into the high school, they called us and they said, he's not responding to anybody. He has autism. He's not responding to anybody. And they wanted me to come up. And I said, well, first thing, I have an entire class of autistic children in front of me. I cannot leave my class and go and see about a child who has passed for a high school in the island and is not being accommodated by the educational system, because the educational system is supposed to encompass every single child, regardless of disability, right? So something is wrong when our children with special needs are not being accommodated by a system, and yet we say we are gearing towards inclusion. Oh no, we're not. And we're not ready for the word inclusion. In Tobago, maybe you could speak to somebody from Trinidad, but in Tobago, we are not ready for that word called inclusion. As a matter of fact, it's a curse word to some of us as professionals, because how do you include a child and not provide the necessary support? So what that child going in needed a teacher's aid. But what happens when we send teachers' aides into the high school is that they are abused by the system, meaning that teacher's aide is supposed to be assigned to that child and that child only. That's not what happens. What happens when a teacher's aide is sent to assist a special child is that the teachers think that is an extra teacher. So the teacher's aide now becomes the babysitter for any class that doesn't have a teacher. They supervise in tests, right? They're helping other teachers. What? So you have to make, it's almost as if you don't think that this person is worth a salary because they are just assisting one child. So let's find work. Let's find something else for that teacher's aide to do. And most of the time ends up being very frustrating to the teacher's aide, especially those who are trained to be teachers' aides to help children with special needs. I hope you're getting me, because I know it was very frustrating. And even now, I thought that the student was getting better. I thought that after 4 years, well, of course, things after 4 years, and then I heard from a teacher that he spends most of his time in the clothing and textile department because the teacher there has an autistic child. So she is very accommodating and she understands a child who has autism. So what happens with the rest of subjects? He may be good in clothing and textile because he spends most of his time there. But what is about to happen as he approaches 5th form? And now it's time for CXC. And now he's supposed to be in exam mode. When a child with autism has not been allowed to really be integrated into the system. And this is what I'm talking about. And when they said that they were going to send him back, I told my principal, never send a special child back to a special school. When they pass for a regular high school, they have to stay. It forces the government, it forces administrators, it forces them into a place where they must accommodate because you have signed on to the convention. You have signed on to a treaty that says you must accommodate. So anytime we take back a special child into a special school, we are regressing, and we are regressing fast. All right? Most of our children are not assessed, and there's a major problem in creating IEPs. I think that was said before. And I have another example, right? I'm not going to be long with my examples. One of our children that was years ago too. One of our children was sexually assaulted at home, all right? Went down to the police station. And in the police station, obviously, nobody, right, could communicate with this child, right? So a teacher had to leave who is living 3/4 hour away, had to get up 10 o'clock in the night, get a taxi down to the police station, right? Because the person who had sexually assaulted her, he was the mother's significant other. Let me say that, significant other. So the mother, even in the police station, was trying to block for him. So you see where we are, where teachers have to be doing all manner of things because because special education cannot just be in our schools. Special education has to move beyond our classrooms. And we have to get people to now accommodate our children, because this is the reason why our children, when they leave school, they have nowhere to go, because they are not accommodated on the airports, they're not accommodated in the police stations, they're not accommodated in the various divisions of the assembly. They are not. All right. So, and those things are problems. Those things are the things that we deal with on a regular basis. And it is tragic, and it's almost frustrating for us because we work so hard with these children and we try our best to get them to the place where they could do an essay, they could do an exam, they could do school leaving, because we have children who we train to do school leaving and or the essay. And when they get to high school, the level of bullying, the level of, oh, that's not, even with the teachers just completely ignore our students, completely ignore. And that is heartbreaking, that a child leaves a special school and comes into an environment that is so difficult and so strange, and people pass that child at them. And teachers who do special education, because there is no way you could get a teacher's diploma, there is no way you could get a master's in education, there is no way you could get a doctorate, and you have not been into the class, you have not been to the classroom. No way. So I can't understand how, because they have to do a course. Every teacher has to do a course in special education, and you come to this place where you're so nonchalant about special education. It's almost like as if you prefer that it's not there. So when people don't want our children in their classrooms, our children feel it, especially our autistic children, They sense people's dislike, they sense hatred, and when they lash out and when they have their tantrums and meltdowns, you want to call them violent. But an autistic child responds to what you feel in your heart. They could feel your heart. They could feel your thoughts and your intentions towards them. Yeah, and those are the things. Those are the things that we on a continuous basis have to reassess. Because across the Caribbean, when I watched the last honest conversations that you all had, we are facing the same battles, and even more so in Tobago, because in Tobago, we do not have access to the resources in Trinidad. All of my training I did in Trinidad, meaning I left here on Friday, every Friday after the classroom, and returned Sunday night, after a whole weekend, from Friday to Sunday, right? Training as to how to deal with an autistic child. In as much as I learned about the disabilities in Jamaica, nothing prepared me for the life in the autistic classroom. Nothing prepared me for children who self-harm. Nothing prepared me for this child that will climb the burglar proof and lie down at the top of the blackboard. I was like, what level of madness is this? And I made up my mind, even though I was not trained in autism in Jamaica, I made sure that I went and I did my training in Trinidad. Sometimes I would take a whole week off and do a week-long training. Once they brought the personnel to Trinidad, I did it. But we do not have those kind of facilities in Tobago. And it's affecting how we are able to educate and advocate for our special needs community. So even as I wrap up, I want us to begin to think as to how we could, because all of this is good, how we could come together and fight collectively, because we are fighting the same battle. We are fighting the same battle. We are fighting the same enemy that wants us to pull back and hide our special needs children. That wants parents who have special needs. Well, go so with your special child now. It still happens. One of the students in my class, when her child was born, the doctor looked at her child and said, "How your child look like a mongoloid so?" And I don't know if you understand what a mongoloid is in where you are, but that's a very insultive term in Tobago and in Trinidad. It is insultive. It's almost like calling your child a monster, just because the child had Down syndrome. And this is where we still are. This is where we still are. And we have to form a collective fist to fight back against this enemy that wants us to continue to pull back and say, all right, the fight is not worth it. It is worth it. It is worth it when we see children move from the special needs community into high school and they blossom and they move on to university and they find their place in society. So I want at the end of this, our children must move from not just being children, but they must, at the end of it, they must become advocates for the special needs community. So that's what I wanted to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Crawford-Trotman, for your passionate presentation. Like you said, we're fighting the same fight, and we will definitely be contacting you to speak to the community of special ed teachers here in Barbados on how we can, better fight that fight on behalf of our children. Thank you. I want to encourage our presenters to be brief as we are coming towards the end of our panel discussion. And on that note, I invite Brother Julian Pierre, second Vice President of the BUT and member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to introduce the next presenter.
Special good evening to everyone. For Utica Christian, teaching is a calling. As an educator for just over 20 years in the secondary school system in Antigua and Barbuda, her passion is to empower others through resilience-focused practices. This passion has shaped the trajectory of her personal, educational, and professional activities. In 1998, she graduated from one of her country's elite educational institutions, Antigua Girls High, and did a short stint in the field of optometry. However, knowing that education was her purpose and turning her back on lucrative offers in the medical field, she pursued 2 certificates of participation in 2002. The first in training and screening and assessment of dyslexia from the University of the West Indies, and the second in special children, special needs, a course in examining teaching and reading strategies from the Antigua Chamber of Commerce and Antigua and Barbuda Center for Dyslexia Awareness. She continued to take advantage of other professional certification opportunities relevant to special needs, technology integration in education, and language education between 2005 and 2013. By 2016, Mrs. Christian was respected by the administration of Clare Hall Secondary as a seasoned teacher and an authority in the field of special needs. She went on to attain a diploma in special education from the University of Southern Caribbean and coordinated the founding of the Student Intervention Assistance Team at that institution. In 2018 to 19, Mrs. Christian partnered with Dr. Julia Bird to pioneer a motor vision therapy program to further address the needs of some of the at-risk students. Sadly, this program had to be shelved due to the pandemic. In 2021, in spite of the challenges of the pandemic, she was awarded a Master of Arts in Inclusive and Special Education from the University of Roehampton Online. She is a prolific conference speaker, having presented on the topic, Exploration of Gifted and Talented Education in Antigua and Barbuda, at the Conference for Academic Research and Development, hosted by the Antigua State College in 2016, and inaugural Education Conference for the Antigua and Barbuda Union of Teachers in 2017. Furthermore, she has spoken on other platforms on various social and educational issues. She recently authored her second book, Mirror Conversations, which encourages self-affirmation practices for the 21st century woman. Mrs. Christian's second love is foreign languages and has taught French at her school. She has used this affinity to teach English as a second language. Her role as administrator, worship director of the Vibrant Faith Ministries, Antigua and Barbuda's only eco-friendly, faith-based community, fuels and guides her pursuits and that of her family. She continues to give selflessly to her nation as a dedicated contributor to the work of the Silston Library Restoration Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mrs. Utica Christian.
Thank you very much, sir, Mr. Peer, and good evening, everyone. I'm indeed excited to be here, and I want to greet you from the land of 365 beaches, Antigua. Thank you to the coordinators of this particular event, where I'm able to speak candidly on the issue of special education. I wanted to first of all permit me, all who are listening, to give my working definition of special education. For me, special education is the collective unearthing of every child's gift so that they can be productive partners within our society. So with that definition in mind, let us move a step further. For over 25 years, the Ministry of Education in Antigua and Barbuda has made formidable steps towards inclusive and special education, as far as it relates to screening and assessment, modifications for students, forming community partnerships, teacher training and certification, policy development, and specialized placement. And so in 2013, there was a presentation of the special needs policy that we use to guide us here. And in that policy, it makes concrete allowances for inclusion and inclusive education, insofar as they have allowed for a special needs education officer within the Ministry of Education. However, the legal document that we use to govern education, which is the Education Act of 2008, does not yet provide us with a clear definition of inclusive education. So what we have been doing in Antigua focuses on more integrative practices than inclusive practices. And so I'm going to highlight 4 best practices that I have observed and fortunately have been a part of 2 of them. So the first one I'm going to look at is one of our government-driven, government-funded special schools enrolls students with varying exceptionalities, all right? From cognitive to physical to intellectual difficulties. And what they have done in that particular school is they have consistently engaged the students in what we call life skill-based programs. So they will prepare meals, they will have a garden, and so on. But further to that, they have successfully integrated them into society, so they're not hidden away in this special school. Every year, once there is carnival, the students are part of what we call a carnival troupe. And so because we're from the carnival, we know what that means. So the students are out there and they are all about. So that's the first best practice. Secondly, this one is a business that offers employment to students and even persons who have varying exceptionalities. Some of the employees were actually students at the school that I mentioned before. As a matter of fact, one of the founding partners of this particular business had some affiliation with that school. So I believe they were able to make a connection there. Third best practice. At my school, we have been integrating deaf and hearing impaired students since 2015. These students have a sign language interpreter, and that sign language interpreter helps to sign for them during the classes, and they have to navigate them through the classes. The first student the first time we had a student, it was 1 person. This student has since successfully graduated with CXC subjects and is currently enrolled in a tertiary institution in North America. Currently, we have 5 students at the school, 4 of whom are in 4th form and 1 of whom is in 1st form. We give kudos, first of all, to the partnership that has happened between parents and the school to ensure that these students have been successful academically. Finally, The formulation of the Students Intervention Assistance Team that we launched in 2015 at my school has helped to facilitate requisite learning intervention for our students, and they have been able to provide instructional support for educators, especially those who feel overwhelmed by the special educational needs that will present themselves in our school. Let me just interject here that my school is a regular, what we call a general special secondary school. So it caters to students from forms 1 to 5. It's not a special education school, it's a general education school, but we have had to accommodate students with varying difficulties from time to time, ranging from dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and the like. So let's talk about some solutions. I have two, and these would help to guide us as to where do we go from here. First of all, there is a practice that I have observed, and this is my name for the practice. It is called the test to label, then what? Test to label, then what? So the solution to that is we have to restrict and reduce this practice. We test the child, we recognize that the child has ADHD, then what? What usually happens is that the teachers, parents, students are encounter a level of helplessness because, okay, now I have ADHD. Do I just take medication? How often? What do I do? And so they are helpless. And so what would usually happen is that there is the resulting effect, I should say, is that there's more alienation than inclusion, because we don't know what to do with this child who bounces off the wall. We don't know what to do with this child who cannot read fluently. We don't know what to do with this child who has problems with solving the mathematical situations. Therefore, my recommendation that is twofold. One, instead of asking, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with this child? We could ask, or we should ask, what's unique about you? Or what's unique about this child? Having answered that question, we can move on to assess how can we collectively, fully appreciate the uniqueness of this child. This leads me to solution number 2. We should begin to adopt resilience, focus practices. The child has dyslexia, the child has autism, now what? How can we afford this child the opportunity to bounce back? This is what resilience is all about. We can include motor vision therapy. And of course, this one is a big one for me, encouraging a greater collaboration, not just between school and home, but a greater collaboration of all of the ecological systems as suggested by Yuri Bronfenbrenner. This is where home, school, community, society merges together to create well-rounded, productive citizens. I believe that if we adopt some of these solutions and the best practices as a region, we can begin to take another step further in evaluating what's happening, not just when the child acts out in grade 6 or in form 2, the child is still reading at grade 2 level, but we can begin to assess and legislate what should happen from even in prenatal care. And so that is where I want to end my opening remarks for this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Christian. It really cannot be emphasized enough how important that home-school community connection is. I want to invite now Sister Stacia Burrows, member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to introduce our 5th and final presenter for this evening.
Good afternoon. Well, good evening, everyone. Comrades, I am honored to introduce you to Dr. Pauline Watson Campbell. Dr. Watson is a pediatric occupational therapist with a specialty in development and behavior, and she's an educational psychologist with over 35 years experience in early childhood and special education as a pediatric occupational therapist, focusing on children with physical, developmental, and behavioral disabilities. Over the years, Dr. Watson Campbell has been recognized for her work. She is an awardee of the National Award Badge of Honor for her services to the field of occupational therapy and child development in Jamaica. And she is also an awardee of the Prime Minister's Medal of Appreciation for service to education. Her areas of work include developmental and behavioral screenings, assessments and consultations, individual therapeutic intervention, family coaching, and outcomes of diagnosis for children with special needs. Dr. Watson Campbell is founder and executive director of the McCam Child Development and Resource Center, the first inclusive program in the field of early childhood development since 1986. Her work at the McCam Child Development Center includes
spent her money well. A voucher?
Start that again. Her work at the McCam Child Development Center includes giving oversight to the development of programs, providing assessments and therapeutic intervention for children with functional deficits, behavioral and developmental disorders. She has a particular interest in children with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder and autism spectrum disorder, but just loves engaging with young children. In 2008, she coordinated the first research project on the prevalence of ADHD among school children aged 5 to 15 years in Jamaica. Dr. Watson Campbell is passionate about inclusion for children with disabilities. She has presented locally and internationally on the topic and has been credited for her work in developing the first inclusive early childhood center with a clinical arm known in the English-speaking Caribbean. This early work was recognized in 1990 by the Tufts University in Boston. Over the years, she has also worked as a consultant to various agencies promoting the welfare of young children with and without disabilities through special projects. Dr. Watson Campbell is Vice President of the Occupational Therapy Association of Jamaica and serves on the board of the School of Occupational Therapy, Southern University of the Caribbean, based in Trinidad. She is author of Sealing the Cracks, Managing Behavioral Problems in the Classroom, and is co-author of the McCam Curriculum, a developmental approach to early childhood education level 1. Outside of the work setting, Dr. Watson Campbell is a deacon in her church and leads the health and wellness ministry, which seeks to encourage persons to be proactive about their health. She enjoys being in quiet spaces where she can appreciate the wonders of nature and spending time with her family. She is most satisfied when she brings clarity to situations surrounding children's lives. Dr. Campbell offers her private practice at Burlington Medical Pediatric Place. Colleagues, comrades, specially invited guests, members of the general public, I ask you to please welcome Dr. Pauline Watson Campbell. You're muted.
So good afternoon, good evening. I thought you were going to make a synopsis of that, but thank you so much for your introduction. And just a very special thank you as well to the Barbados Union of Teachers through Mr. Lovell, who contacted me and invited me to be a part of this honest conversation this afternoon. And I think he was basically guided to me by Dr. Monteith. So thank you both. And I hope that, considering me as an occupational therapist, you will recognize how integrated I am, how included I am in the team approach to working with children with special needs. Putting the pieces together is what I kind of entitled my little talk. And it seemed to me that for the past 40 years or so, when I entered the special education arena, that this is what I seem to have been doing, and I'm still doing it. So as an occupational therapist, a pediatric occupational therapist, I was coming from a medical model of rehabilitation when I joined the Pioneer Assessment Team at the Micro Care Center. I think a lot of persons in the Caribbean actually come to Jamaica to the Micro College and to the Care Center, Child Assessment and Research in Education Center. Well, I started out when that center opened its doors. And, it was with great trepidation that I did that because working in the field of education was very new to me. And special education was something that I really didn't know a lot about at the time. And I've had to learn. I had to learn very quickly because I became a part of the assessment team, meeting together on a weekly basis to determine diagnoses for children and to offer guidance for parents and teachers and so on. Very interesting time it was for me. I spent about 5 years there. And then in 1986, March, I thought, well, I started the Macam Child Development Center, but it came out of a need that I saw, a gap, to ensure that children could be given an early start. So when I was seeing those children at the Micro Care Center, they were upwards of 5 years. And I realized as a developmental specialist that I needed to see those children so much earlier. So that is one of the things that is so important. And we do plug in terms of development that we start as early as possible. So I started the Macam Child Development Center at 3. The children who came to me could be as early as 3 months, babies really. Well, we at this time, we're going to do from 3 to 6 years because after 6 years, most of the children would have somewhere to go. However, in recent times, because early childhood in Jamaica has been expanded to or extended to age 8 years. So now at Macam, we do see children from 3 months up to 8 years. So the idea of having these children for early intervention, which we know is so important, was also, I thought I didn't want to see a segregation happening for these children. So the best way to do it was to have children working and learning together with their peers here, who were typically developing. And so the idea of inclusion came about. I had no idea what inclusion was at the time. So I can't say I was starting off with this grand idea of being inclusive. It was really coming from a heart that said, let's have children learn and play together, right? So that is how we started the idea of inclusion. And, I'm sure you will realize how difficult those first years were. I mean, we really saw a lot of people come and go. Once they saw a child with special needs in that room or in, anywhere around, then that was the first sign for them to go out through the gate again. So it was a lot of time had to be spent, you know, doing educational forums and doing things through the media and so on to help to, you know, break down the barriers. And what we saw over, I would say probably about a 5-year period, more and more persons started to leave their children behind because I suppose they were hearing that nothing bad was going to happen to their child because other people had had, you know, a good experience. So the barriers were breaking down, the social, cultural barriers were breaking down. The other thing is that we were very challenged by the financial aspect of it, because we all understand that special education is very expensive. If we are going to do special education so that the children get the individualized attention that they need, inclusion should not just be about having the children in a, you know, all in a class together, mixing them, you know, those with special needs and those without. It's a lot more to that. And what we found is that we had to keep our classes pretty small so that we could address the needs of the children. So we couldn't have any classroom with more than about 10 children. And we had to look at the ratio of children that we were putting together, what types of diagnoses and that kind of thing. So financially, we struggled. We really did have a hard time. The other thing is that to do this kind of thing, you have to find a resource team. You have to have a team that is a clinical team, as well as an educational team, as well as a caring team. And so that whole mix of staff was quite difficult to find, you can imagine. Because if you're going to set up an inclusive setting, you have to have special educators, early childhood teachers, nursery staff, speech therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists if necessary. So it's a whole group of persons coming together. And so I was, you know, when I look back now, I really do have to say thanks, you know, to God for providing the right people at the right time, because we had all of these persons at some point, not all being, you know, full members of staff, but persons coming and going throughout the day, offering the children the interventions that they need. So that was the very beginning of things. Now, after 36 years at the McCann Center, I would say that we have worked through a lot of the, you know, the early teething pains. I believe that we have become a benchmark for inclusion in Jamaica. And I think you heard already that we had to go and do some publishing of materials so that we had a curriculum that we could use, because at the time there was no early childhood curriculum, in fact, in the Caribbean, because I remember in 1997, I came to Serval in Trinidad. There was a conference called Serval. I don't know if it is still there, but I was invited to come and to present this curriculum so that they would, you know, look at it and determine if this was something they could have as well. So that was something that we were able to contribute. I think the other thing is that we were able to look at strategically planning how to, you know, promote this whole idea of inclusion. And we were able to do that by hosting like the first forum on inclusion in Kingston in 1990. What I have found over the years is that if this thing is going to work, the person who is the administrator of that school has to buy into it. You know, it's not something that just government is going to tell you, you have to run an inclusive school, because the children will come and not much will happen for them. But if the person who is the administrator and, you know, is now sold on the idea, then they are going to put all their effort towards making it happen. And so I think over the years, what we've seen with, you know, not obviously not us alone, but through government policy and training and, you know, an expansion of schools that are now having children with special needs as in an inclusive setting. However, I must say that having the children in that kind of setting does not guarantee that they are going to get special education. And I think Dr. Sharon Anderson-Morgan, when she spoke the last time, talked about the fact that the resource persons such as special educators, although there's a MICO and although there are 2 other institutions that train in special education, we cannot find enough special educators. And right now, even at McCam, we're having a big problem getting, attracting early childhood special educators. And I will say early childhood as well, because sometimes the special educators will come, but they're not happy with working with young children. So that is something that I think we need to really look at, you know, that special education in early childhood should really be promoted as something that is a specialty area, because we need to have the children, you know, having the kind of interventions that they need from that very early stage. So I'm going to just go on to say that the McCam model is something that we are working on now so that we can have it in blueprint and so that it can be made available to persons, you know, outside of Jamaica even. And this is because I think what we have experienced over the years, over the 36 years, has really given us a pretty good idea of how inclusion can work at the early childhood level. Okay, so that is something that I would want you to look forward to. And then I would also say that my book that was referred to is also another resource material that would be very helpful for teachers, because it is something that it's like a little reference book for them to look at strategies and so on. Just, you know, whip it out and look at something that they could probably try. But I would just like to end by just plugging this whole thing of having an inclusive team and the role of occupational therapy in special education, because if you understand what occupational therapy is, we are seeking to unearth the underlying features of any dysfunction, since our core mandate is to facilitate function and assist individuals in being functional and in achieving independence in activities of daily living. So children with like neurodevelopmental disabilities who are likely to be delayed in achieving their milestones and to have sensory issues that makes it difficult for them to relate with their environment in a positive way, or they may have difficulty with processing auditory or visual information, or even poor muscle strength and tone, which has an impact on even how they are able to write. What is it that we can do to assist? We can help the teachers to understand what these underlying problems are and how to approach them. Even in terms of how to deal with children's behaviors, irregular behavior patterns is something that we can assist in doing. And so I think that what we can conclude is that team approach, the combination of education and therapy during the early childhood years has far-reaching effects in terms of helping the child to acquire the range of skills that they need in terms of performing activities of the daily living, becoming more settled as like sensory issues are dealt with. They are able to focus for longer.
First, and then you do assessment.
So I would just like to say that we need to, I know that we are at different levels, at different stages in our development in the islands, but as we plan and go forward, let us recognize that it is a team approach and that, we can really work together better when we are, or the children can benefit when we are working together as a team. So, we have tried over the years to be intentional in offering workshops like on handwriting, understanding the motor and perceptual and behavioral aspects of handwriting. And for teachers, that is a biggie for me because I see so many children that have underlying problems and they're not, it's not understood, it's not even identified for handwriting. And also understanding the needs of children with ADHD within the classroom, and intrinsic and extrinsic factors in behavior management. These are some of the topics that we actually offer through workshops at the McCann Center. So in conclusion, I would say that the team approach in special education is significant and necessary to achieve optimum outcome for the child, no matter the capacity for change. As we share information on the children, we are empowered to make the best decisions for them and for teachers to address specific issues in teaching. Our motto at the McCann Center is, it's no small thing to influence a child so fresh from the hands of God. Thank you for having me, as we've had this discussion together.
Thank you very much, Dr. Watson Campbell. Colleagues, we have had 5 presentations, and this is now your opportunity to join the conversation. Yes, Mr. President.
Hi, good night once again. I just want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Sharon Anderson Morgan, who is one of our first presenters, LaShonda Skippins. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Janice Gibbs and Mrs. Allison Murray, who was the originator of this idea. So welcome, colleagues.
Thank you. Like I said, this is now your opportunity to join our honest conversation on special education. We have over 100 participants, so I ask that you do so respectfully by using the raise hand button. Feel free to state which member of the panel your question or comment is directed to. And when you begin to speak, state your name and your school or country. Do we have any questions or comments for the panelists? Yes, Tasia Gonzalez.
Yes, it's Tasia Gonzalez Barrero from the Clear Hall Secondary School in Antigua. And I would just like to comment, first of all, that I quite like this idea of having an honest conversation about inclusive education. And listening to all of the presenters, which were very well done. Thank you very much, ladies. Listen to all of the ladies presenting, you realize that there's a theme, a trend that is sadly running throughout the Caribbean, throughout the region, and that we're all suffering from the same malady that affects education, unfortunately. However, I think this is a question that any of the ladies couldn't really answer, because most of them spoke, if not all, talked about a fear that some educators have in terms of how they ought to address the topic of inclusion or addressing those particular students who may need that extra help. Now, we've run the gamut of having workshops, of having professional development activities on these things, but how effective have you found these workshops to be? Any of the ladies could answer. How effective have you found these workshops to be in addressing the shortcomings or the shortfalls of educators where this is concerned? That's the first question. The second question is follow-up activities. Follow-up activities, are they done? Let me, for want of a better word, follow-up activities done regularly to ensure that the teachers are putting into practice these things that they would have learned throughout these development activities. Thank you.
Anyone on the panel willing to answer? Yes, Ms. Christian.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, I would, if you, can I go ahead?
Doctor. Go ahead, Doctor.
Sure. Dr. Watson Campbell, go ahead. And after that, Ms. Christian.
Right, well, I just answer a part of what was just asked, really. You know, we've been doing workshops over the years, quite a lot of them. But when I did my doctoral program, I looked at teachers' knowledge, attitudes, and practices, okay? And one of the things that I realized, having done quite a lot of workshops with them as well, and having interviews and, you know, just gathering a lot of data, is that people get knowledge, right? You are taught something at a workshop, a one-day workshop or a one-week workshop, and then you leave and you go back to your setting. What I have found is that if persons don't get an opportunity to put into practice what they just learned by having someone even there to help coach them a little further, right? Then their attitudes sometimes don't even change, and after a time they just don't continue with using the strategies and so that they have learned. But where persons have had an opportunity to learn strategies, put them into practice with support, right? And then they see that there is some positive change, then their whole attitude towards using these strategies, I think, become a lot more positive. That's one of the things I found.
Right. Okay, I would like to add to what Dr. Watson Campbell would have said. And my experience has been that there is a lack of interest in changing. There is a lack of interest in changing mindsets. And so as Mrs. Trotman would have said earlier, that we're all one accident, one incident, one experience away from needing some sort of special intervention. And I think if persons would adopt that philosophy, I think it would help more to increase the interest so that when the knowledge comes, we are more proactive in terms of how we would include some of these practices, even though it's a one-day workshop, even though it's a 2 weeks workshop, even though there are no facilities, we would try to find a way to help. But I think the level of, what should I say, or the level of overwhelm that some persons would feel, I think that happens, and the lack of interest. I think those are two things that are blockers. Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer question 2, but that is my contribution to question 1.
Okay, I'd like to add something to question 1 as well. This is Charmaine. Do I go ahead? I have my hand up.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Yes, my take on it is that many of the, some of the persons who, though they have acquired the knowledge, they need to have first a change of mindset. And if the change doesn't occur in the mind, then no matter what amount of training that you give, it's not going to impact the person or the system. The other real reason, and I'm sure it's happening throughout the Caribbean, where teachers are just under pressure, they're under attack, they're apprehensive, because you find that persons are saying they're comparing you, so these children are high performers. So many principals, some of them decide not to take these children to lower their scores. And so when they have literacy tests, they want to have 100% literate students, 100% numerate, and now schools are being ranked. So I believe that those are some of the real reasons for teachers being apprehensive. But honestly, if we continue to have honest conversations like you're having, and we try to put together, perhaps maybe we should form a regional group so that we can become more effective, because like my colleague had said before, the issues are real, they are similar right across the border, and we just need to collaborate amongst ourselves and to lobby our governments, because somebody had indicated before that governments are using the special ed as football tool, financing, and the president, the parents will have to become more hands-on and to become advocates. So they lobby their schools and they lobby their MPs. Those are my 2 cents worth.
Very good interventions. Before I move on, Dr. Watson Campbell, there's a question in the chat about where we could get your book. So you can put that information in the chat, or you can turn on your mic and share quickly. If there's a link, you can also put that in the chat. You're muted, Dr. Watson Campbell.
Yes, it's actually published by Urban Books and Publishers, but I will put in the chat because I would have to find out some more details for it. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. President.
Perhaps you could put her number in the meantime, Pauline, Dr. Watson. Maybe you could put your phone number and your email address in the meantime so they could also reach you like that.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah.
All right.
Yes, thank you very much. But in Monteith, I just want to reassure you that the BUT has started the process of starting a formation of a regional body. That was the mandate coming out of the last meeting. And I also want to say that as a union, the BUT has listened, and we have implemented a union-based solution in Barbados where we have invested in a micro care center kit through Mrs. Alison Murray, where we will be seeking to train teachers in special education. We understand the significance of it, and we are, as a union, willing to play our part, and that involves investing in whatever way possible. So we are seeking to do our part, and we would encourage those persons who are desirous of participating in this activity to contact the union through myself or any member of the executive.
Thank you, Mrs. Crawford-Trotman.
Good evening. One of these strategies that I think work for me in our outreach and training is that we break up the high schools into different groups. So all form teachers, we deal with them at a particular time, because form teachers don't know how to interact with a deaf child or autistic child. The issues that happen in the form room are totally different than may happen in the geography room or in the home ec center. So we group the teachers together so they could get to speak to us, because I think that a lot of teachers bow to the peer pressure from other teachers. So if other teachers have an attitude towards a special child, and we have in a whole group setting, form teachers are able to pose certain questions that may not come up with in the music room or with the music teachers, you know, because each teacher has a concern. How do I teach music to us? How do I teach the steel pan to a special child? You know, because each teacher is going through their own process. So if we could reach the teachers with their concerns and they're able to speak in a small group, then we're able to address each concern and work on strategies to integrate that child into the high school, especially because it's the high school we have the most problems. All right, that has been my solution over here in Tobago.
All right, sorry, may I just add one other thing quickly? That is why also co-teaching that is encouraged with the special education teacher as well, being and working in collaboration with the regular classroom teacher. And they should really have common planning time and working together like that as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Holder.
Yes, please. I just wanted to weigh in on this whole idea of putting knowledge into practice. Often at the end of these training sessions, you are charged to go out there and be change agents. But I find sometimes these persons are not given the opportunity to mentor. We look outside of our own. You just send them out, they got the training. And I think if you give them the opportunity, they have to sell themselves. They're gonna sell the idea to someone else. The idea of using a particular methodology, idea of using this particular practice. They're going to go all out, they're going to give of themselves. They're now given the opportunity to start the bus and get other people on board. So I think sometimes we need to give these persons the opportunity and see what they can do. Thank you.
Very well said, I agree. Brother Cass?
Good evening, moderator. Are you hearing me?
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. I was scrolling through and I noted the panel, the title for Dr. Ramona Archer Bradshaw. So I say a good evening to the Chief Education Officer and to your distinguished panel, to the President and executive members of the DUT, my brothers and sisters, and to all colleagues and well-wishers present. I want to join the presenter from Tobago because I share that experience of how you are treated when you're born in Tobago. So I'd like to say that I am born in Trinidad and Tobago. Also, she is Dr. Trotman, it is. You mentioned the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I'm speaking from two perspectives here. One, as a church leader, and two, as one who has served on Barbados Committee for the monitoring of the rights of persons with disabilities. Well, the third perspective, of course, is that I'm a teacher at a school, a secondary school, Gooden Secondary School in Barbados. My name is Kes Amhaselassie Jacob. And when you mentioned the convention, I remembered our service in the committee. And one of the things that I want to put to you is, or to ask you, what role do you see for a representative dealing with education on a committee that monitors the rights of persons with disabilities and takes up the cause, you might say, of persons who are involved in special education, not only the children, but also those who are serving them. On that committee, there were many representatives, including myself. I was representing church. And representing church, also, I brought the perspective of our church, or the church, being involved actively with the Barbados Council for the Disabled. So I'm asking from the panel, I didn't get in on at the beginning of the program, so some of these things might have been mentioned already. What role you see for someone who represents special education in such a committee that monitors the rights of persons with disabilities? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask Mrs. Trotman to respond and Mrs. Holder as well on that comment about the role of educators on monitoring committees for the rights of the disabled.
I think educators have an invaluable contribution to any committee, because you see those that sit in the classroom, they are able to give such a unique perspective, because we have a lot of people who are making decisions about education who are not in the classroom. And that's a major problem, because you have to be on the ground. If you've never been in the classroom, you cannot form legislation for us. You cannot be representing us to international bodies. And you have not been a part of the classroom. We are on the ground floor. We see these children every day. And at the end of it, we see children leaving our schools and not transitioning well into society. And that is a problem. We see inclusion in the Caribbean not working. So we could tell you why it's not working. Because if it fails in our classroom, it's failing on every single point after that. So we need people on the ground. And so many times our views, our perspectives are being ignored. And that has to stop. Because in as much as the parents are important, the children who stand as advocates are important. We who see these children every day are critical when it comes to decision making. And that needs to change. We are not just teachers. We are not just babysitters. We stand in seats of authority and we see things. Our observations are important. Every report that we've ever made in our life, those things are important. We see things that are not regularly seen. We could give examples in the classroom that people need to hear, because there are stories that we have as educators that the world have not heard. They believe that everything is all right on the ground floor, and it is not. Just because you're in the penthouse, it don't mean the ground floor all right. All right, so that's it for me.
Fully
Yeah,
agree with
totally
that. Yes,
agree.
Mrs. Holder.
Yes, I totally agree with that. I think furthermore that educators are integral to those decision-making process. As you said, we are on the ground. I say we get down in the trenches. We don't just go on the ground, all down in the trenches. And I think often people seem to think that they know what is best for us. But overall, when they make decisions and you think of students in regular, especially education students, there are so many other considerations, things that you have to look at when you are making decisions for these children. Who better then can be the voice? Who better can be the advocate? Furthermore, if you know me well, persons in Barbados, I say we are the advocate, we are the nation. We are the persons out there, right? Advocating in all corners. We pushing doors for these children. And as I said, too often we are excluded. And then something comes top down to us and you expect us to fit it into the package that you have sent the students that we are working for. And often that does not work. And then when you get the pushback or the resistance, there I say that's a whole nother door to be opened. Thank you.
Thank you. A hand was raised earlier, Jay Baptiste. I see your comment in the chat. Would you still like to make an intervention or ask a question? Jay Baptiste.
I just wanted to make, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to make the same comment that I posted. Sincere thank you for everyone involved with the presentation as well as the panel. I found it very insightful and just making it short. It was a bit more winded, but I'm definitely looking forward to some changes in Barbados. And speaking as a parent of a special needs child who's about to enter secondary school, I think more needs to be done in order to help these children to excel. And it's okay to give lip service, but action needs to follow this. Thank you.
Thank you. Rashana Goring.
Good night, everyone. I just wanted to commend VTU for putting on such an insightful program. I sit here as a special needs educator, and I'm also doing the special needs program right now at Urdeston, because I do recognize that best practices are changing ever so often. And even though you would have been trained a few years ago, it is important to come back to the table, see what is new. And I have learned so much this evening. So I just wanted to commend you and say thank you for putting on such an initiative.
Thank you for participating. Sabrina Bavell.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I agree. This was really an insightful and, great initiative and planning by the BUT. I really learned a lot. Being on the view as a parent, as a caregiver, as an assistant aide, I really see that teachers are really, bashed a lot. And I do think that persons, have to be really in mind that You know, teachers really play a major role in child's education and life. And I would like to see more happening for them, you know, coming up. I've started my own groups because I have an autistic child and I've been trying to initiate for persons all overseas to help because I know that we don't have the resources, and traveling from here to all overseas, I've learned a lot and seen how, you know, the classrooms and the difference, and try to use the initiative here where we live to see better, you know, better done here in Barbados. And I know that things can be done not only in Barbados, but in the wider world. And as I say, you know, the youth are our future, whether we're special, as these kids have a lot, they're unique in their own way, they have a lot to offer. And as I said to one of the ministers already, if we don't help with the system, they're going to be a burden on society in years to come. So what do you want to do for us? I know you get up there and you talk all political, but what is the next action step? You know, instead of bashing teachers, communities, put on a uniform and come in the schools and see what they're really going through. So when you can hear the view of what really happens. You know, these teachers have been working really hard day to day, doing their best. And sometimes I just hear things that are not really, you know, should not even really be there, you know. And I thank you guys for giving that more insight. And I appreciate all the teachers and everybody for doing just a hard work. And I know what it is. I see it, I live it, and I understand it. So I see from each other eye. But I would like more to be done, you know, so that we can get things up and running. You know, as they said, we only need one active change, one active person to make a creative change. And we could all be in this together to do a better, get this going. And I am willing to advocate and go the way because everybody know I have a big voice and I'm not afraid. So if you need people to help push, be here. We here to push through.
Okay, may I make a final comment before I go, because I have to leave shortly? Just to say, colleagues, I also would recommend that as a best practice, having frequent parent teachers training and consultation. I recall vividly when I was head of professional services, putting on a parenting workshop on special education. And let me tell you something, that was catharsis because a lot of persons ended up crying. We realized how traumatized the parents were. And some of the parents were even teachers who had children with special needs who were treated so badly in the regular system. It is unbelievable. It was, I have never had such an experience. And it told me that there has to be a space that parents come together, they learn about what's happening so they can support the children, because when they don't understand how to support the children, they're frustrated, they take it out of the children go to school, the children are also frustrated and the teachers don't understand. But so sometimes when you have a commingling and having those persons coming together and really hearing what the issues are, understanding the issues, advising the parents what to do, tell them what kind of tests they can try if they can afford to, just holding their hands, just listening, because honestly, many persons have said it before, it's frustrating for parents or children, or parents of children with special needs, or also even for the teachers. So there has to be some form of collaboration. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Monteith. And before that, thank you, Sabrina. Maybe next time we're having such a conversation, we must get a parent on the panel. Yes, Sister Charisse?
Good evening. I believe it was Utica Christian. She gave a definition for special needs that I would like her to post in chat or to repeat. I am finding in the classroom, in my regular classroom, I'm seeing children who just a second, who are regular, and I think Mrs. Christian spoke about testing and then what, but some children are not tested, they're not labeled, they are in the regular classroom
And I think we need to, it was Dr. Gooden Monteith who said just now about having more talks with parents, etc. We need to be able to identify when children have special needs and that all special needs are not severe and that there are different levels, especially for autism. I am really intrigued by autism, and I am seeing it in the regular classroom. I also think I heard Pauline Watson Campbell speak about in terms of identifying things, even from just how children their handwriting. I am really interested in learning a little more about that because as you say, from being in the classroom and seeing these things, I want to learn more about them.
All right, so I am going to do both. I am going to type it in the chat and I'm going to repeat it here, as well as add some context to what you were just referencing there. So for me, this is the Utica Christian definition of special education: the collective unearthing of every child's gift so that they can be productive partners in the society. To speak to what you were talking about, some children are not tested or they don't even have a label, but you understand that there's something happening. So there are some things like neuromotor immaturity that you would see being reflected. And sometimes they are sometimes symptoms that are evident in things like dyslexia, conditions, I should say, like dyslexia, attention deficit disorder, autism, and the like. So in addition to the handwriting, the poor handwriting, you have things like being unable to sit still or pay attention, unable to concentrate and focus, poor hand-eye coordination, problems with sequencing, slow processing information, speech and articulation problems, difficulty copying from the board, slow to tell the time, especially if it's an analog clock, problems tying shoelaces, difficulty maintaining friendships, low confidence and self-esteem, difficulty riding a bike, or exhibiting clumsiness, balance, and coordination problems. So they might not have the label of any of the pervading, what should I call it, special need conditions, but they might be exhibiting some of these symptoms. And this is where the occupational therapy, the motivation therapy comes in. And so as teachers, we have to be aware of what these are and how we can try to remediate them. So I'm just going to look at one, just permit me another minute. Let's look at the one where there's an inability to sit still or pay attention. So although this might be reflective of ADD or ADHD or some other mobility issue or so, the child might not have ADHD or any of those conditions. It might be a situation where the child has worms. And so if you're not aware of that, or you don't know what to do, or in terms of asking a few questions, you might end up sending this child for a $500 US assessment when all they needed was the medication for the worms and they're fine. So we need to just do our investigation and see how we can understand. And I believe Dr. Watson Campbell could weigh in a little bit more on the occupational therapy aspect of it. Thank you.
Dr. Watson Campbell.
Yes, thank you. I actually have to go myself too when I've finished with this, my contribution here. But yes, this handwriting thing is something that it has special, a special interest for me, because we've gone through, different thinking on what handwriting is all about. So you've had, you know, in the past where children are taught to write in a particular way, right? So I know that, like here in Jamaica, there were some schools that when you see how the child writes, you know they come from that particular school. So there is a lot of focus that can be put on the end product, what it looks like. But the process of handwriting is actually quite complex, although it looks so simple. And I think we just heard some of those things. The eye-hand coordination is definitely a neuromuscular aspect to it. You know, it is probably the child's muscle strength and tone, which is a whole body situation, or it could be like a perceptual problem that is going on. Certainly after it carries a behavioral component to it, because the children just really get totally frustrated with handwriting, some of them. Because people are telling them over and over again that they can't read their handwriting. But I'm just coming down to a very simple thing like how a child holds their pencil, you know, and this thing of having like a pencil grip. We talk about the pencil grip for handwriting, or the tripod where the fingers kind of come together. Instead of it opposing thumb to index and resting on the middle finger. There is an anatomical way of doing it. That is the correct way. So it has to do with whether the web space is opened or not. It has to do with whether you have flexibility in the wrist as you write. You know, even some children position their hand over what they are writing. You know, there's just so much to it. So that's one of the things we actually do workshops on for teachers, because the teacher will tell you that, well, as long as I can read what the child has written, it doesn't really matter. And it does matter, because when you talk about muscle fatigue, you know, when the child is writing and they get very tired and they think, this is too much, I can't be bothered with this, and they just leave it, you know, and become very resistant to handwriting. So it's a simple thing, sounds like it, but it can be quite an issue for some children. And of course, we know that because of the level of involvement, some children I know from special ed, offering accommodations for them to have writers, a scribe for their exams and so on, because it is really is that bad. Yeah, but it is quite a complex thing, actually.
Indeed, it's a lot we take for granted as well. Thank you for that, Dr. Gooden Monteith.
Yes, this is my final comment. Colleagues, just one thing I'm begging the teachers, please remember that you should not be diagnosing the children, because like one of my colleagues just said before, sometimes it might look like one thing and it's something else, and sometimes the child might not even have special needs. So teachers ought to be very careful, keep your journal, observe, make notes, and so on, and refer, but please don't go about diagnosing now, all right? Have a good evening and take care from Jamaica.
Yes, and I'm saying the same too. Thank you so much for having us. It was really our pleasure. And we don't mind being invited back again. All right, bye for now.
Thank you. I'll go to the chat to give anyone else who wants to make a comment the opportunity to raise their hand. Brother Kess made a comment about having students with hearing disabilities at Raiden Sealy Secondary School accompanied by a teacher. That would be a teacher from Irving Wilson School. And that teacher would be present in their classes. So yes, we do have things in place working for our children. I see a hand raised. Anissa?
Trudi, good evening. Good evening all. I am Anissa from Guyana, and I must say how honored I am to be invited. We also have a few other teachers online right at this moment from Guyana. So I say thank you for the invitation. I think this panel had very outstanding speakers. Oh, you want me to start the video in a minute? Can you actually see me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Just now. Yes, I was saying to you that I think that this panel had really outstanding speakers, and I really like the boldness from Ms. Trotman from Tobago. But not many of us are actually that bold. Many of us are intimidating in a sense that if we speak out, we may lose our jobs. And those are the things we actually face. Then we have, not many of us work with honest principals or receptive principals who we could actually say, well, you know, we have a lot of special needs children, we need help with these children and so forth. I think we need to have more inclusion especially in the mainstream classes. There are a lot of children you recognize who have learning disabilities, and now with COVID, it's even more scary because there's a greater setback, and there's a lot of challenges for our teachers, especially those who are not trained, like myself. I am not trained in special needs. I attended a few workshops, yes, but then that is it. It's not a case where I'm faced to deal with those children to help them. Right now, I'm teaching a class of 13 students, what we will normally say remediation classes. We call it 6-year program. And I like the fact that Ms. said we do not diagnose these children, but we make reference. So one of the centers, and we can make references, but not many persons or parents do understand and will actually follow up on those programs. So we as teachers now have a lot of work to do, especially if we're going to want to help those students. So I really thank Mr. Lovell and his team for having this session, this topic, especially on special needs. And I hope that this is not the last presentation we're going to be having on special needs. I really want to hear more about it. Yes, there are other topics I would want to hear about, but I want to hear a little bit more of special needs. And please continue to invite us. We Guyanese, continue to invite us, and we will be here to give in our bit. You know, it's the first time for us, so we basically tune in. I have a teacher right now who teaches at one of those schools. She's online, Ms. Butcher. I don't know if she want to say anything, but I just want to say thank you all, and continue to remain focused and continue to do the hard work and help those children. All of us will be bold, but we need to have that spirit of boldness like Ms. Trotman.
Thank you. Joan Butcher?
Yes, good evening. All protocol observed. I was caught on the spot. I was going to remain silent and just listen on, but there was no way I could have escaped. I am a special needs teacher at one of our special schools, which is the Harold Davis Special School, as formerly used to be the Ptolemy Reed Rehabilitation Special School. I am not a trained special needs teacher, but I learned on the job. I'm a retired teacher and on contract. And first of all, I must say, when I got into special needs, to be honest, when I was called back to teach remedial, it was at a secondary school. And I remember the officer said to me that oh, why don't you go to the, at that time it was the Ptolemy Reed Special School. You would have so much of work to do, you know, and you just retired and it would be more relaxed. And I decided to go. And when I got there, my God, as I tell people every day, teaching one special needs child is like you're teaching a class of 30. Because I teach the children with physical disabilities. And we have children who are, we got it deaf, we have those who cannot speak because of speech impairment, Down syndromes, it's all mixed. And at first it was a bit difficult, but as I I'm there from 2012 to present. And I have fallen in love with special needs. I am so sorry. I don't know if my contract will be renewed at the end of July, but I will still be a special need teacher. I love working with these kids. They have taught me to love. They have taught me to be forgiving. And I have a passion. I love the part of when my sister spoke of all the different types of disability, and everything she said, it was as if she was talking to me exactly what is happening in my classroom. We do not have a special needs curriculum as such. What we do, we take the primary and we have to take out and make it adaptable to your class and to your student, because what people do not realize that when you're teaching a special needs school class, it is not a class, you're teaching an individual child, because every special need, there is a different special need, you cannot teach the one thing actually the same time. For me, I teach an individual child where I try to study my children, and I have a teacher aide with me, and we try our best. I have children who are very intelligent, but they cannot write. And sometimes it worries me. You have children who are smart, they intellectually, they're there, but they cannot, they have a speech impairment, but you put them on the tablet, they're better than I am. So I want to say that, tonight it was mind-blowing for me. It was a little emotional when I heard some of the speakers, in particular, not a favorite, but I love Miss Trotman's passion for special needs. And I endorse, I would want to be, even if I'm not in the system, an advocate for special needs. And one of the things that I feel that we need to do is not to wait until our children reach an age of 6 and 7 and 8. We can detect it at a very early age. Once they go through the therapy, you notice your child at a certain age, and even the teacher in the mainstream school, you notice your child at a certain age, they are not doing what they ought to do. There is where you can probably make some representation to somebody, advise a parent or your head or somebody, this child is not writing, when a child at a certain age supposed to be writing. And if we can detect those things at an early age, it would be of, so much of help. I have children in my class who, if their parents had known before that there was a problem with their writing, their hands, I am certain those kids would have been writing better, or they would have been walking, but because of the late intervention. So we have, as special needs teachers, we have a lot to do. We have a lot of work. I am also wondering, when I heard the brother spoke of the training that they're having in Barbados, I am wondering if they will cater for persons like me who retire, and let us say my contract is not renewed, and I would like to continue in this specialty to know more, because probably at some time I might be thinking of probably opening or assisting in a private school in a special needs department, because I know that there's a lot more that I would like to know. Because of my passion, I am willing, if you, my brothers and sisters, are looking for advocate, are looking for persons with a passion for special needs, and I am eligible, I'm there. I thank Miss Anicia Wolford for, having me. I feel honored and blessed to be here. And I know this is not by accident. This had to be God, because, I'm out, I'm not in the mainstream, I'm retired, and to be here sitting this tonight, I feel really blessed and honored to be among you people. So what I
Thank
would
you,
like
Ms.
to say, you
Butcher.
keep up the good job. Keep up the good job. Thank you for
Thank you.
listening.
Thank you for the encouragement. Thank you. Two final comments. The first from Tricia Austin, immediately after Alison Murray.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tricia Austin. I am a teacher in Barbados. One of the things I heard tonight that really stood out for me was, I believe it was Dr. Watson Barrow, or Barrow Watson, maybe getting her name wrong, that spoke
Trisha,
about.
we're not hearing you clearly.
Oh, you're not hearing me clearly? Any better? Any better?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, right. She spoke about the importance of having that team approach. And, you know, when I heard that, it broke my heart a bit, because for me, that is the biggest challenge for us as mainstream teachers. What I could say for me as a teacher in mainstream, um, having children with special needs included in my classroom. I have trained, I have gone out and made sure that I equip myself in order to best help my students. And then there's no team. There's nothing there for support. So when you end up with a child with special needs, maybe a practical example, last year, height of Delta and COVID, and we were in school, we were in person, and I had a student with special needs. He had diagnosed intellectual challenges and behavioral issues. And this was a child who couldn't keep a mask on, who would lick the table, who would lick other people, who would put everything in his mouth. And you could imagine the kind of time and attention that that one child would take. And when there is no team, when there's no one to say, well, okay, this behavior is becoming extreme today, I may need to, you know, get a behavioral therapist or some occupational therapist to come in and help him with certain skills and what's not. And that's not available. And he's on a waiting list at the ministry for however long. You know, it's like, it breaks your heart, because you know that there's only so much you can do for this child. And at the same time, it takes away from what you can do for the other students in your class. So it was a constant battle between trying to best help your children with special needs reach their potential, but also get your children who are typical to thrive and not have to be held back because your attention is taken up some days, the majority of the day, with managing behavior or with dealing with outbursts and that kind of thing. And one of the things that, you know, I have learned and I have implemented in my class is that what works for a child with special needs works for all children. And so my classrooms are always very interactive, lots of different things we do and modalities that we use and strategies to reach everybody. But then when there isn't that support system, it is extremely exhausting. And there are days when, if I was not there as his teacher, I remember was on sick leave for a week, and his mother was asked to keep him home because no one else could seem to manage him. And it was like, no, we can't do this. This is COVID. This child is on the floor. He's all over the place. He's attacking other children. He's doing this. The monitors are chasing him up and down the school. And it was the point where, all right, he's gonna have to stay home until this teacher comes back to school. And it got to the point where until I got to school on mornings, his mother had to wait with him at the gate before they could let him come onto the compound. So things like that, when there is no support system, it is very, very hard on that one or two teachers at an institution who have to battle and who have to fight. So when we advocate for children to be placed in special needs schools, it is not from a lack of knowledge, it is not from a lack of wanting to do your best for these students or to integrate or any of those things. Sometimes it's just a sheer matter of, or we do not have the capacity for all our children to thrive equally and fairly unless we have the support systems that are necessary. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. I missed the beginning of Dr. Archer Bradshaw's message when she was speaking. I got in a bit late, so I don't know what the plans may be. But for us who are in the trenches right now, it is difficult. I have one student right now who is atypical, and today was my first day back in person. And when I spoke to his parents this evening, you know, one of their major concerns was the fact that when they picked him up this evening and they said, I'm coming to pick up John Doe, everybody knew who John Doe was. And for them, it was this sense of, this is only the first day. You know, how are these people viewing my child? Is this going to be a problem for him? Is this going to be a setback for him? And I could understand the anxiety, I could understand the nervousness, because sometimes unless you are in it and you experience it and you kind of have the knowledge and the background to work with it, it very much will just be brushed off as, oh, another child who shouldn't be here, another child who should be at a special school, or another one of these children. And these children aren't foolish. They pick up on these things. They pick up on the comments that maybe a server or a janitor may make, or, you know, a monitor may make as they have an outburst, or as they don't respond typically as you would expect what we would say a normal child to do. And as a teacher, you try your best to advocate for this child to step in, to do your part, but you also can't be there every minute of the day that this child has to interact. So all of those are things that are challenges where we have to look at the culture of the school, the culture of us as a community, and really how we think and how we view children who are atypical, and really assess what we need to change and how best we can go about doing so. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And the point was made earlier for the inclusion of trained paraprofessionals to assist special educators. The final comment was to Alison Murray, who's also a member of BUT's Professional Development and Research Committee.
All right, thank you. Good evening to everyone. And Tricia, when they leave you at primary school, they head over to secondary school where the experiences are even more challenging, because, you know, if you go to a general secondary school in Barbados, you're going to be prepared for that CXC and CCSLC. So there really needs to be a lot of work. We need to do a lot of work to make sure that these children are catered to. I wanted to address my colleague from Guyana who asked about training. So the micro-diagnostic reading test really is for individuals who would have been already trained in special educations or have had some type of training in education. But there are other assessments that we would, as a union, be willing to train you in. And of course, we'd reach out to you to ensure that you get that information. Would it be wonderful if we're all using these same assessments and we're able to really look at data and comment on trends in Guyana and trends in Antigua? And that really is the vision. So kudos to the BUT, kudos to the president. I mean, we would have approached him very early. I got a lot of no's from lots of people, but from the very beginning with the BUT, when they first came into St. George Secondary to bring in those readers and writers for my students, you know, they continue under the leadership to support special education here in Barbados. Mr. Lovell, hats off to you for continuing this conversation. Good night to everyone.
Thank you, Alison. I now invite Sister Marcia Burke, PRO of the BUT and member of the Professional Development and Research Committee, to move the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Trudi. We're finally here, but it was worth it. With protocols already being established, ladies and gentlemen, a very good night to you all. It gives me great pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for our professional development session entitled Honest Conversations in Special Education best practices, and solutions. Let me first of all start by giving thanks to Almighty God for today's session. For today's session was a resounding success. First and foremost, I would like to thank Ms. Sharice Rock, our chairperson for the Professional Development and Research Committee, for her opening remarks. Ms. Trudi Harris, our moderator this evening, I thank you so much for doing a wonderful job. To Pastor Dr. Alicia Aline, I want to say thank you for our opening prayer. For a general introduction and remarks, I thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Rudy Lovell. To the Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, Technological and Vocational Training, Barbados, Dr. Ramona Archibald-Shaw, I would like to thank you for your remarks. We really appreciate you making yourself available this evening to share them with us. There were also many other members who made this possible today. So first off, I would like to thank Mr. Anderson Butcher, Ms. Andrea Puckering, Mr. Ian Marshall, Mr. Julian Pierre, and Ms. Stacia Burrows for introducing our speakers. And of course, to our speakers, a panel, all ladies panels from across the Caribbean. So we had Dr. Charmaine Gooden Monteith from Jamaica, Mrs. Donna Holder from Barbados, Mrs. Korene Crawford-Trotman from Tobago, Mrs. Utica M. Christian from Antigua, and Dr. Pauline Watson Campbell from Jamaica. Ladies, I want to thank you for making yourselves available to come to share your knowledge, your experience, your suggestions, your thoughts, with us. We really appreciate it. It was indeed food, not just for thought, but for practice. And I look forward to us working together across the Caribbean, coming together, because this has been really good, having different views and different opinions and realizing that we, at some point, have similar issues that if we work together, we can find solutions. And I want to thank the Professional Development and Research Committee of the Barbados Union of Teachers and the executive for planning this event. It was a lot of work putting it together, but here we are finally at the end. And it goes to say that this day, special education, honest conversations on special education, has been getting around. It's been getting out there. We've had persons from, I'm told, we've had persons log on from Guyana. We had persons from the UK. So for those of you who joined us this evening, our audience here in Barbados, across the Caribbean, and I have as far as to go across the globe because I don't know who else is watching, I want to thank you so much for joining us. If there's anyone for some reason I may have forgotten, please accept my apologies in advance. But once again, thank you, everyone.
Comrades, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it has been my pleasure. Good night and be safe. And a recording of today's panel discussion will soon be available online, posted on BUT's YouTube page and Facebook page. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night, everyone.